The morning sun cast shadows across Port Royal's plaza as Isabella Morales stood before the colonial tribunal, wrists bound with rope that chafed her skin raw. The humid Caribbean air hung heavy with salt and rotting fruit from the nearby market, where vendors had stopped to witness her disgrace. "Isabella Morales," proclaimed Magistrate Hernandez, his voice carrying across the crowd. "You stand accused of providing aid to enemies of the crown. How do you plead?" "Not guilty," she whispered, though she knew her fate was sealed. The evidence was damning: letters in her handwriting, testimony from neighbors, accusations from her own brother Diego, who stood among the accusers with tears streaming down his face. She had been trying to help. When British ships threatened their fishing boats near Esperanza Bay, Isabella reached out to a French merchant captain for protection. She never imagined her desperate letters would be intercepted and branded treasonous. "The evidence is overwhelming," continued the magistrate. "Letters detailing Spanish vessel movements, maps of coastal defenses, communications with known enemies." "This tribunal finds you guilty of high treason!" A gasp rose from the crowd. Her mother Maria wailed. Her father, a proud fisherman, stood silent with bowed head. "However, in consideration of your youth, this tribunal sentences you not to death, but to permanent exile. You are banished from all Spanish territories. You have until sunset to leave Port Royal forever." The words hit like physical blows. Exile meant death for a woman alone in the Caribbean, a fate worse than execution. Father Miguel pushed through the crowd. "My child, Captain Torres will take you to Tortuga. It's not much, but it may give you a chance." The hours passed in tearful goodbyes. Her mother pressed a small pouch of savings into her hands. Her father couldn't look at her, but she found his fishing knife among her belongings. Diego approached last. "Why, Isabella? Why did you betray us?" "I was trying to protect us," she replied through tears. "The British ships were getting closer. I thought—" "You thought wrong," he interrupted. "Look what it's cost us. The whole village treats our family like lepers." As Captain Torres's vessel pulled from Port Royal's harbor, Isabella watched her home shrink away. The colonial buildings seemed to mock her with their beauty. The familiar harbor sounds faded until only waves remained. The 3-day journey to Tortuga passed in silence. When they reached the infamous pirate haven, Isabella was struck by its chaotic energy. Ships of every description crowded the anchorage. Sleek sloops, armed brigantines, weathered merchants. The air rang with different languages as crews loaded cargo of questionable legality. "This is where I leave you," Captain Torres said. "Word of advice, find protection quickly. A woman alone here faces dangers worse than sharks." Isabella stepped onto the slick pier, clutching her belongings. Around her, rough men hauled cargo and engaged in drunken conversations. She had taken 20 steps when she felt eyes upon her. A group lounging near a tavern had noticed her arrival, their expressions making her blood run cold. She quickened her pace, but they followed. Their crude comments and harsh laughter pursued her. Panic rose in her throat. She broke into a run, but her skirts tangled, sending her sprawling onto the filthy pier. Her belongings scattered as the men's laughter grew louder. "Enough." The single word cut through the air like a blade. The laughter stopped. Isabella looked up to see a figure approaching, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with fluid confidence. As he drew closer, she saw bronzed skin, dark hair tied with leather, white shirt open at the collar. A cutlass hung at his side, his hand resting casually on its pommel, but his eyes captured her attention, dark, intelligent, taking in everything with a single glance. "Captain Reyes," one of her pursuers stammered, and Isabella realized she faced one of the most feared pirate captains in the Caribbean. "I believe the lady dropped something," Captain Reyes said, his cultured Spanish accent seeming at odds with his reputation. He retrieved her belongings with surprising gentleness. "Are you injured, señorita?" "No, Captain. Thank you." He studied her intently. "Spanish, but not local. Your accent suggests the mainland colonies, and your circumstances suggest you're not here by choice." "I was exiled from Port Royal." A slight smile played at his mouth. "Exiled? How interesting. And what terrible crime earned such a fate?" "Treason," she whispered, "even more interesting." "Walk with me. I believe we have much to discuss." Captain Reyes led Isabella toward his ship, La Venganza, anchored like a predator among prey. The vessel was magnificent, sleek lines suggesting speed, cannons promising devastation. Her black hull gleamed and her figurehead seemed to watch Isabella with knowing eyes. "Impressive, isn't she?" Captain Reyes said. 32 guns, faster than any Spanish ship, home to the finest crew ever assembled under a black flag. They climbed aboard via rope ladder. Isabella was struck by the immaculate condition: scrubbed decks, gleaming brass, perfectly coiled ropes. This wasn't the chaotic pirate vessel of tavern tales, but a disciplined warship. "Your reputation precedes you, Captain," Isabella said. "Even in Port Royal, stories of La Venganza are whispered." "Which stories? My supposed cruelty? My ruthless nature? Complete lack of mercy?" He leaned against the rail with casual elegance. "Tell me, what exactly did you hear?" Isabella felt heat in her cheeks. "They said you killed a man for looking at you wrong, that you burned villages for refusing tribute, that you've never shown mercy. Yet here you are unharmed despite being completely at my mercy." "Perhaps the stories aren't entirely accurate." A crew member approached, weathered with intricate tattoos. "Captain, the men are asking about provisions. Tell Rodriguez to handle it. See that we're not disturbed." When alone again, he gestured toward chairs near the stern. "Sit, you look ready to collapse." Isabella sank gratefully, exhaustion finally catching up. The past week had been a blur of accusations, trial, exile, and now this surreal encounter. "Now then, tell me about this treason." "British ships threatened our fishing fleet. I wrote to a French merchant captain thinking he might provide protection. The letters were intercepted and misinterpreted as intelligence gathering. And were they?" The directness startled her. "No, I was trying to protect my village." Captain Reyes studied her. "The line between protection and betrayal is often thin. Sometimes helping one group means harming another. The question isn't whether you betrayed Spain. Their tribunal decided you did. The question is whether you would do it again." "What do you mean?" "A woman with your skills, literacy, knowledge of Spanish defenses, familiarity with trade routes, could be valuable to the right employer, especially one already branded a traitor with nothing left to lose. I won't spy for you." "Spy?" He laughed genuinely. "I have no need for spies. I prefer direct approaches. What I'm offering is employment, food, shelter, protection, a place to belong when the world has cast you out. You're offering me a position on a pirate ship. I'm offering survival. Do you have other options? Wealthy relatives in Martinique? A convent willing to take an exiled traitor? A merchant willing to employ a woman with no references and a criminal past?" His brutal honesty hit like blows. He was right, she had no other options. "What would you expect? My crew are excellent sailors and fighters, but not educated. I need someone who can read and write in multiple languages, who understands colonial trade and politics. An advisor. An advisor to a pirate captain. An advisor to a businessman who happens to conduct business outside colonial law." Isabella watched him pace. "And in return? You become part of my crew. Share our profits. Enjoy protection of my name, and you never have to worry about being powerless again." The last words hung like a challenge. Isabella thought about the tribunal, the helplessness as her fate was decided by men who never understood her motivations. About the predators on the pier, about the uncertain future with no family, no home, no protection. What if I say no? I put you ashore and wish you well. You'll probably be dead within a week. And if I say yes, then you become mine. My crew member, my advisor under my protection. But understand, there's no going back. Once you join my crew, you belong to La Venganza until I decide otherwise." Isabella felt the weight of decision. Join pirates and abandon hope of redemption or face almost certain death, I need to think. Of course. But don't think too long. We sail with evening tide, and this offer leaves with us. She spent the hour observing the crew making preparations. They were diverse, various nationalities united by loyalty to their captain. She watched them work with efficiency, noticed how they treated each other with respect. She also noticed how they looked at Captain Reyes, not with fear, but deep respect bordering on reverence. These men would follow him anywhere. As sunset painted the sky orange and purple, Isabella found Captain Reyes watching the sunset with quiet contemplation. "Have you decided?" he asked without turning. "What guarantees do I have that you won't simply discard me when I'm no longer useful?" "You have my word. Among pirates, that counts for more than legal contracts." "Your word for what exactly?" "That as long as you serve faithfully, you'll have a place on my ship." that you'll be treated with respect due a valued crew member, and when time comes to leave, if it ever comes, you'll do so with your fair share in my blessing." Isabella searched his face for deception but found none. "And if I can't do this? If I'm not cut out for pirate life?" Captain Reyes smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "Then we'll discover that together." Footsteps interrupted them. The tattooed crew member approached reluctantly. "Captain, the men are wondering about your guest. Some are concerned about having a woman aboard." Isabella felt embarrassment burn her cheeks, but Captain Reyes's expression darkened dangerously. "Are they indeed? And which men are questioning my decisions?" "Captain, I didn't mean—" "Gather the crew. All of them. Now." Within minutes, La Venganza's entire crew assembled on deck. Perhaps 30 men ranging from barely 20 to well past 50. They stood in respectful silence. "It has come to my attention that some have concerns about our newest crew member." He gestured toward Isabella. "Allow me to address those concerns directly." He paced before the assembled men, hand on sword hilt. "Señorita Morales has been exiled for treason against the crown. She has knowledge and skills valuable to our enterprise. Most importantly, she has been personally chosen by me." The captain stopped pacing, fixing them with a steel stare. "If any man feels my judgment is flawed or that he knows better than I who should sail aboard my ship, let him speak now." Absolute silence. "Excellent. Let me be clear about something else. Señorita Morales is under my personal protection. Any man who harms, threatens, or even looks at her with disrespect will answer to me personally. That is not a conversation any of you would survive." Still silence. "Furthermore, she is not some tavern wench to be pawed at. She is a crew member and will be treated as such. Any man who forgets this will find himself swimming with sharks." Questions? When no one responded, Captain Reyes nodded. "Good. Prepare to weigh anchor." As the crew dispersed, Captain Reyes returned to Isabella's side. She stared at him with gratitude and amazement. That was, "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I meant every word. But those men will watch to see if you can hold up your end. If you prove weak or useless, my protection only extends so far." Isabella nodded. "I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't." He studied her face in twilight. "So tell me, Isabella Morales, are you ready to become a pirate?" She thought of Port Royal, the life she was leaving, the uncertain future ahead. Then she thought of the alternative, slow death in Tortuga, powerless and alone. "Yes," she said firmly, "I am." Captain Reyes smiled with something approaching genuine warmth. "Welcome aboard La Venganza. Try not to regret this too quickly." As the ship moved from Tortuga's harbor, Isabella gripped the rail, watching the island disappear. Behind lay exile and disgrace. Ahead lay unknown waters. But for the first time since her arrest, Isabella felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. 3 weeks into her new life, Isabella understood that everything she thought she knew about pirate ships was wrong. La Venganza ran with military precision under Captain Reyes's leadership. There were strict conduct rules, detailed maintenance schedules, and a comprehensive code governing everything from loot division to prisoner treatment. Isabella had been assigned a small private cabin near the captain's quarters, a privilege not lost on the crew, though none dared comment after his warning. She spent days learning ship rhythms, studying charts and manifests, gradually proving her worth. "The Spanish treasure fleet will pass through these waters in 10 days, she said, pointing to the chart. "Based on manifests I've reviewed, they should carry silver from Potosi mines and gold from New Granada." Captain Reyes leaned over the chart, close enough she could smell sea salt and leather. "How many ships?" "At least 4 galleons plus escorts. The manifest suggests they're expecting trouble, heavier escort than usual." "Expecting trouble from whom, I wonder?" He traced the convoy's likely route. Isabella had learned to read his moods. The tightening around his eyes suggested dangerous planning. "Captain, surely you're not considering attacking a Spanish treasure fleet." "Why, Señorita Morales, are you concerned for my welfare?" "I'm concerned for all our welfare. Those galleons carry enough firepower to blow us apart." "True. In direct confrontation, we'd be outgunned. But who mentioned direct confrontation?" Before Isabella could ask what he meant, a shout came from above. "Sail ho, 2 points off starboard bow." Captain Reyes was moving before the lookout finished. "Come, time to see how we earn our living." On deck, Isabella saw a distant sail. Through the captain's spyglass, she made out a merchant vessel flying Dutch colors. Dutch East India Company, said Rodriguez, the tattooed first mate, probably carrying spices and silk. Or sugar and rum from their Caribbean colonies, Captain Reyes added. Either way, tempting. You're going to attack them? Isabella asked. That depends on several factors. How heavily armed, how many crew, whether they'll surrender peacefully. He gestured to Rodriguez. Signal them to heave to for inspection. Inspection? More civilized than immediate cannon fire, Captain Reyes explained. We identify ourselves as representatives of the Free Republic of Pirates and request inspection for contraband. The Free Republic of Pirates? Theater that makes the business more palatable. Pirates with governmental delusions seem less threatening than mere criminals. The Dutch vessel, a merchantman called Vrolijk, initially tried fleeing when La Venganza's nature became apparent, but the pirate ship was faster and more maneuverable, closing within an hour. Ahoy, Vrolijk, Captain Reyes called through a speaking trumpet. This is Captain Alejandro Reyes of La Venganza. Heave to for inspection. The response came in accented English. We are peaceful merchants. We carry nothing of interest. Nevertheless, we must insist on inspection. Comply and no harm comes to crew or passengers. Isabella watched with fascination and unease. This was actually happening, her first pirate raid becoming brutally real. The Dutch captain, faced with superior firepower and nowhere to run, finally agreed. Within minutes, a boarding party led by Captain Reyes crossed between ships on rope lines, terrifyingly dangerous to Isabella's landlubber eyes. Stay close, Captain Reyes had instructed. Whatever you see, remember this is how we survive. Vrolik's deck was crowded with nervous Dutch sailors and passengers, merchants and families returning from colonial postings. Captain Reyes moved among them with calm authority, his presence draining fight from potential resistors. Captain Vanderberg, I presume, he said, approaching a stout, graying man, clearly the ship's master. I apologize for inconvenience, but we must inspect your cargo. This is piracy, Vanderberg replied without conviction. This is business, a distinction that becomes important when we discuss compensation for cooperation. Isabella followed the boarding party into the hold, where they discovered exactly what Rodriguez predicted: sugar barrels, rum cases, chests of valuable goods destined for Amsterdam. Modest cargo, but respectable, Captain Reyes observed. We'll take 20% as inspection fee. 20%? That's robbery. No, that's piracy. Robbery would require a highway. Consider the alternative. We could have sunk your ship and taken everything. Instead, you'll reach Amsterdam with 80% intact and an exciting story. The transfer took 2 hours. Isabella watched amazed as pirates worked with mechanical efficiency, selecting items for best prices while leaving the Dutch enough for profitable voyage. But Captain Reyes's conduct throughout truly surprised her. He was unfailingly polite to passengers, even returning a locket accidentally included among taken goods to a terrified young Dutch woman. Please give my regards to Amsterdam's burgers, he told Vanderberg as they prepared to leave. Perhaps mention that Captain Reyes continues appreciating their fine maritime workmanship. As ships parted ways, Isabella stood in near shock. She'd witnessed her first piracy, and it was nothing like expected. You seem troubled, Captain Reyes observed, joining her. I expected more violence. Violence is wasteful. Dead merchants can't tell others that Captain Reyes treats captives well. Fear is useful, but reputation is more valuable. But you're still stealing. Am I? Those merchants will report their pirate encounter, and likely find insurance rates reduced because they survived without casualties. The cargo we took would have faced various colonial taxes now unpaid, and goods will reach markets where they're desperately needed at lower prices than legal trade offers. Isabella stared. You're justifying piracy as public service? I'm helping you understand the world is more complex than Spanish colonial law suggests. Those laws serve kings and governors, not people who actually live in these islands. That evening, as La Venganza sailed through calm seas under stars, Isabella couldn't sleep. She found Captain Reyes alone at the bow, lost in thought. Having second thoughts? He asked without turning. Maybe. I'm not sure I understand what I've gotten into. You've gotten into survival. Everything else is details. But at what cost? Now he turned, expression serious in moonlight. At the cost of idealism. Of believing the world is fair, that following rules guarantees justice, that good intentions protect people you care about. Isabella thought about her trial, the magistrate who condemned her despite knowing she was innocent, laws that branded her traitor for trying to protect her village. You sound like you speak from experience. For a long moment, Captain Reyes was silent. Then surprisingly, he began speaking. I was once a captain in the Spanish Royal Navy. I believed in service to the crown in defending Spanish interests. I was young and idealistic. Isabella felt her breath catch. What happened? I was ordered to transport slaves from Africa to Cartagena. 200 human beings chained like cargo. His voice was flat, emotionless. When disease broke out during crossing, my orders were to throw sick ones overboard to prevent infection spreading to valuable ones. Horror hit Isabella like a physical blow. I refused. I tried tending the sick, finding another solution, but my first officer, appointed by the colonial governor, had me arrested for disobedience and took command. By Cartagena, over half the slaves were dead. And you? Court-martialed, stripped of rank, sentenced to 10 years colonial prison for endangering valuable crown property. His laugh was bitter. 200 human lives officially classified as property, and my attempt to save them treated as goods destruction. Isabella stared, beginning to understand. But you escaped? I was freed by the very pirates I'd once hunted. Captain Marcus Blackwood's crew raided the prison transport, and when they discovered me aboard, offered a choice. Join them or take chances in colonial prison. And you chose piracy. I chose freedom, the ability to make my own decisions about right and wrong, rather than following orders violating every principle I held dear. He turned back to sea. The irony is that as a pirate, I've probably saved more lives than I ever did as a naval officer. Is that why you offered to help me? Because you recognized a fellow exile? Perhaps. Or perhaps because I saw something reminding me of who I used to be. Someone willing to risk everything protecting others. Even when those others don't appreciate the sacrifice. They stood in comfortable silence, watching stars reflect on calm water. Finally, Isabella spoke again. Captain, what happened to the surviving slaves? I bought their freedom with my share of first treasure we captured. Most chose settling in Tortuga or other free ports. A few asked to join my crew. Isabella looked at him with new understanding. That's why your crew is so diverse. You don't just recruit pirates, you collect people failed by systems they trusted. Everyone deserves a second chance. Even exiled Spanish noblewomen accused of treason. The next morning brought new challenges. The lookout spotted smoke on the horizon, too much for cooking fires or signals. As La Venganza approached, they discovered devastation. The small fishing village of San Rafael had been burned to the ground. Bodies lay scattered among smoking ruins, and few survivors emerged from hiding, told a horror tale. British privateers, gasped an elderly fisherman who'd lost everything. They came at dawn demanding tribute. When we said we had nothing, he broke down, unable to continue. Captain Reyes surveyed destruction with stone face. How many ships? 3, replied a woman clutching a small child. Flying letters of marque from the British governor in Jamaica. Isabella knew of such letters, documents allowing private ships to attack enemy vessels under British Crown protection. Technically legal, but in practice often indistinguishable from piracy. Rodriguez, distribute food and water to survivors. Take them to Tortuga if they wish. Captain, Isabella said quietly, these people need more than charity. They need justice. Justice? What would you have me do? Attack British warships? Start a war? I would have you do what you do best. Hunt down the men who did this and make them pay. For a moment, Captain Reyes looked almost surprised by her vehemence. Then a slow smile spread across his face. Now that sounds like proper pirate advice. The pursuit took 2 days, following survivor information and local fishermen. La Venganza tracked the British privateers to a secluded cove where they were careening ships, pulling them onto beach for repairs. 3 ships, as survivors said, Captain Reyes observed through spyglass. Defiance, Retribution, and Seahawk, all flying British colors and letters of marque. How do we approach this? Isabella asked, having become his unofficial strategic advisor. Carefully. These aren't merchants, they're armed and crewed by professional fighters, but they're also complacent, thinking they're safe in British protected waters. The attack came at dawn when most privateer crews were sleeping off previous night's drinking. La Venganza approached under morning mist, silent until almost within pistol range. "This is Captain Alejandro Reyes," he called through speaking trumpet.
"You are surrounded."
"Surrender and you'll be treated according to war articles." Response was immediate and violent. Cannons roared from beached ships. Musket fire erupted from hastily constructed shore positions. But Captain Reyes had anticipated this, and La Venganza was already moving, her guns returning fire with devastating accuracy. Isabella crouched behind the mainmast, heart pounding through her first real naval battle. The noise was incredible, cannon thunder, splintering wood, men fighting for their lives. Smoke filled air until she could barely see beyond the rail. "Stay down!" Captain Reyes shouted over din, but she could see him moving with apparent calm through chaos, directing crew response with born naval commander skill. The battle lasted perhaps 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. When smoke cleared, 2 of 3 privateer ships had struck colors in surrender. The third, Seahawk, was so badly damaged her crew was abandoning ship. "Cease fire! Prepare boarding parties." The aftermath was almost worse than fighting. Isabella helped tend wounded, both pirates and privateers, while Captain Reyes questioned captured officers. "Captain James Morrison," he said to the privateer leader, a burly man with scarred face and defiant eyes.
"His Majesty's Navy, I presume?"
"I carry letters of marque from Governor Hamilton," Morrison replied through gritted teeth. "This attack is war against the British Crown. This attack is punishment for massacring innocents at San Rafael. But please tell me more about these letters apparently authorizing fishermen murder and village burning." Morrison's defiance faltered slightly. "We were acting under orders to disrupt Spanish colonial activity. Orders to kill civilians? Orders to use whatever force necessary establishing British control." Captain Reyes studied the privateer captain. Then he turned to Isabella, who'd been listening with growing horror. "Señorita Morales, as my advisor on colonial law matters, what would be appropriate punishment for war crimes against civilian populations?" Isabella understood what he was asking and offering. A chance to be part of delivering justice the Spanish colonial system had denied her. Under Spanish colonial law, deliberately targeting civilian populations is punishable by death. Under maritime law, piracy is also punishable by death. Under any reasonable human decency code, murdering innocents demands ultimate justice. Captain Morrison looked between them with growing alarm. "You can't simply execute prisoners." "There are rules." "Indeed there are," Captain Reyes agreed. "But you forfeited those rules' protection when you chose ignoring them yourselves." The executions were carried out at sunset, with surviving privateer crews forced to witness the fate awaiting those who preyed upon innocents. Isabella watched from La Venganza's deck, feeling complex satisfaction and horror at what she'd helped orchestrate. "Regrets?" Captain Reyes asked, joining her. "No," she said, surprised by her voice's firmness. "Those men got what they deserved." "And how does it feel delivering justice with your own hands rather than trusting magistrates and colonial tribunals?" Isabella considered seriously. "It feels powerful, dangerous, like something I could become addicted to." Captain Reyes nodded approvingly. "Then you understand both the appeal and danger of our life. Power is intoxicating, but also corrupting. The moment we start enjoying killing rather than accepting its necessity, we become no better than the men we just executed." As La Venganza sailed from their victory scene, Isabella reflected on how much she'd changed in weeks. The woman who'd stood trial in Port Royal seemed like a stranger, naive, trusting systems that ultimately betrayed her. This new Isabella was harder, more pragmatic, but also more truly free than ever before. She was no longer a victim of circumstances beyond control. She was an active participant shaping her own destiny. "Regardless of what the world thought of her choices, Captain," she said as they watched sunset over Caribbean waters, "I think I'm beginning to understand why you offered me this position. And why is that? Because you didn't just need an advisor. You needed someone who could understand the weight of choices we make out here. Someone betrayed by the system badly enough to appreciate the freedom to choose our own justice." Captain Reyes smiled, and she realized it was the first completely genuine expression she'd seen from him. "Welcome to the true Caribbean, Isabella Morales, where justice is what we make it, and freedom is what we're willing to fight for." 2 months had passed since Isabella's first taste of pirate justice, and La Venganza had become more than refuge. It had become home. She had proven invaluable as Captain Reyes's advisor, her knowledge of colonial trade routes and politics helping them target vulnerable, profitable vessels while avoiding unnecessary confrontations. But it was her growing reputation among the pirate community that truly marked her transformation. Word had spread throughout the Caribbean of the exiled Spanish woman who helped plan Captain Reyes's most audacious raids. Some called her La Consejera, the counselor, others, less charitably, Reyes's witch, suggesting she used supernatural means to predict Spanish ship movements. Isabella found she didn't mind either title. Both represented power she'd never possessed in her former life. The Spanish treasure fleet has changed course, she announced, studying intelligence reports purchased from Havana informants. They're avoiding traditional shipping lanes entirely. Captain Reyes looked up from charts. Because of us? Because of you. Your reputation has grown to where Spanish commanders will add weeks to their journey, rather than risk encountering La Venganza. Flattering, but ultimately counterproductive. If they avoid us entirely, we can't capture their cargo. Which is why I have a proposal. Isabella had been working on this plan for weeks, since realizing their very success was limiting opportunities. Captain Reyes gestured for her to continue. What if we weren't the ones to attack the treasure fleet? What if we orchestrated an attack by someone else? Someone the Spanish wouldn't expect. Explain. Isabella moved to the chart table, pointing out positions. Captain Blackwood's squadron is operating near Puerto Rico. Captain Chen's fleet hunts near Martinique. If we could coordinate their movements, create a situation where the treasure fleet encountered multiple threats simultaneously, they would be forced to split defensive forces, Captain Reyes finished, eyes lighting with interest, allowing smaller, more agile forces to pick off individual ships. Exactly. And we would take a percentage of all captured goods in exchange for providing intelligence and coordination. Captain Reyes studied charts. It would require unprecedented cooperation between traditionally rival pirate captains. It would mean sharing information, profits, and potentially power. It would also mean bigger scores than any of us could achieve alone, Isabella countered, and it would establish us as something more than just another pirate crew. What would it establish us as? Isabella met his gaze steadily. A power, a force that Spanish, British, French, and Dutch colonial authorities would have to acknowledge and potentially negotiate with. The implications hung in the air. This was no longer about simple piracy or revenge against unjust systems. This was about creating a new kind of political entity in the Caribbean, one operating outside European powers' control. You've been thinking about this for some time, Captain Reyes observed. I've been thinking about power, about what it means, how it's acquired, how it's maintained. Colonial governments maintain authority through force and threat of force. Why shouldn't we do the same? Because the moment we start thinking of ourselves as a government rather than outlaws, we become what we originally rebelled against. Or we become something better. Something serving people the colonial governments ignore or exploit. Their debate was interrupted by commotion on deck. Rodriguez appeared with barely controlled excitement. Captain, you need to see this. We've captured a very interesting vessel. On deck, Isabella saw a small but elegant ship flying French colors tied alongside La Venganza. Her crew was gathered under guard, but they didn't look like typical prisoners. Too well dressed, too composed. What do we have, Rodriguez? Captain Reyes asked. The Celeste out of Port-au-Prince, officially a diplomatic vessel carrying correspondence between the French colonial governor and Martinique officials. Officially? Unofficially, she's carrying something much more interesting. Gold, lots of it. Payment for French privateers operating against Spanish shipping. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. French gold meant to fund attacks on Spanish vessels. Exactly the kind of intelligence proving her coordination theory. Bring me their captain, Captain Reyes commanded. The French captain was a thin, nervous man in his 40s who introduced himself as Captain Dubois. His English was excellent, though heavily accented, and he maintained diplomatic immunity air even while standing on a pirate ship deck. Captain Reyes, he said with a slight bow, I must protest this interference with official French colonial business. The Celeste carries diplomatic correspondence protected under international maritime law. I'm sure it does, Captain Reyes replied pleasantly. But it also carries gold intended to fund attacks on Spanish shipping. That makes it a legitimate target under war rules. We are not at war with Spain, Dubois protested. France and Spain maintained diplomatic relations. While French privateers attacked Spanish treasure ships, Isabella interrupted, stepping forward. With gold provided by French colonial authorities and carried aboard vessels claiming diplomatic immunity, Dubois looked at her with surprise, clearly not expecting challenge from a woman. "And you are?" "I am Señorita Morales, Captain Reyes's advisor on colonial politics matters, and I can assure you that what you're doing constitutes war by proxy." "Nevertheless," Dubois said, turning back to Captain Reyes, "I am prepared to offer compensation for any inconvenience. Perhaps we can reach accommodation serving all our interests." Isabella watched Captain Reyes consider the offer. This was a test not just of their relationship but of principles guiding their actions. They could take easy profit or pursue the larger goal. "What kind of accommodation?" Captain Reyes asked. "Safe passage for my ship and crew plus reasonable tribute for your trouble. Say 20% of our cargo? Or," Isabella said before Captain Reyes could respond, "you could provide information about French privateering operations in exchange for safe passage. Routes, schedules, communication methods." Dubois looked shocked. "You're asking me to betray French colonial interests. I'm asking you to choose between cooperation and having your ship added to our fleet," Isabella replied. "With or without your crew aboard." Captain Reyes watched this exchange with obvious interest, allowing Isabella to take the lead in negotiations. She could feel the weight of his attention and that of the crew as she pushed forward with her plan. "Captain Dubois," she continued, "you have two choices. You can maintain loyalty to a colonial system that views you as expendable, or you can recognize that the balance of power in the Caribbean is shifting." "Shifting how?" "Toward those willing to work together rather than against each other," Isabella replied. "Captain Reyes has connections throughout the pirate community. We could provide protection for French shipping in exchange for information about Spanish and British movements. A mutually beneficial arrangement." Dubois looked between Isabella and Captain Reyes, clearly trying to assess how serious the offer was. "You're proposing an alliance between pirates and French colonial authorities?" "I'm proposing a practical arrangement between people who share common enemies," Isabella corrected. "The Spanish certainly consider both pirates and French privateers criminals. The British treat French colonial shipping as legitimate targets. Why shouldn't we coordinate our efforts?" Captain Reyes finally spoke. "It's an interesting proposal, Captain Dubois. What would your superiors in Port-au-Prince think of such an arrangement?" "They would think I had lost my mind," Dubois admitted. "Negotiating with pirates is not standard French colonial policy." "Then perhaps it's time for French colonial policy to evolve," Isabella suggested. "The world is changing, Captain. Those who adapt will prosper. Those who don't will be swept aside." The negotiations continued for hours, with Isabella gradually wearing down Dubois' resistance, while Captain Reyes provided silent but intimidating support. By evening, they had reached an agreement that surprised everyone involved. Dubois would carry a message to the French colonial governor proposing limited cooperation. French authorities would provide advance warning of Spanish treasure ship movements, while pirates would avoid targeting French vessels and provide protection against British attacks on French shipping. "This is madness," Dubois muttered as he prepared to return to his ship. "Treating pirates as if they were a legitimate government." "Perhaps," Isabella replied. "Or perhaps we're simply recognizing a reality that colonial authorities have been reluctant to acknowledge." As the Celeste sailed away into the Caribbean night, Captain Reyes joined Isabella at the rail. "That was impressively done," he said, "though I'm not sure whether to congratulate you or worry about what you're becoming." "What do you mean?" "6 months ago, you were a sheltered Spanish colonial subject who believed in legal authority's inherent goodness," he observed. "Tonight you negotiated a political alliance between pirates and a colonial government as if you were born to diplomacy." Isabella considered his words. "People change when circumstances change. I've learned that survival sometimes requires abandoning old beliefs in favor of new realities." "And what new realities have you discovered?" "That power is the only thing that matters," she said simply. "Everything else, justice, morality, loyalty, is just luxury that powerful people can afford, and powerless people can't." Captain Reyes was quiet for a long moment. "That's a dangerous philosophy, Isabella. Is it wrong?" "No," he admitted. "That's what makes it dangerous." Over the following weeks, Isabella's plan began bearing fruit. Messages arrived from Captain Blackwood and Captain Chen, both expressing interest in coordination efforts. French colonial authorities, through carefully worded communications via Captain Dubois, began providing intelligence about Spanish shipping movements. But it was the response from Spanish authorities that truly marked Isabella's transformation from exile to power broker. Governor Martinez of Cuba sent an envoy, a nervous young officer named Lieutenant Valdez, who arrived under a flag of truce with an offer that stunned even Captain Reyes. The governor wishes to propose a cessation of hostilities, Valdez announced as he stood on La Venganza's deck surrounded by pirates. In exchange for Spanish colonial interests being left unmolested, Governor Martinez is prepared to offer regular tribute payments and safe harbor privileges. Isabella felt a surge of triumph that was almost intoxicating. The very system that had branded her a traitor was now seeking to negotiate with her as an equal. "What terms does the governor propose?" she asked, stepping forward to take charge of negotiations. 5,000 pieces of 8 annually plus resupply privileges in Cuban ports, Valdez replied. In exchange, Spanish shipping and settlements would be considered off-limits to your organization. Our organization? Isabella smiled coldly. Is that what Governor Martinez calls us now? The governor recognizes that certain practical realities require pragmatic solutions, Valdez said carefully. Isabella looked at Captain Reyes, who nodded almost imperceptibly. This was her negotiation to lead. Lieutenant Valdez, she said, please inform Governor Martinez that his offer is insufficient. We require 10,000 pieces of 8 annually, unrestricted access to all Cuban ports, and formal recognition of our sovereignty over the waters between Tortuga and the Windward Islands. Valdez looked shocked. Señorita, the governor cannot possibly agree to recognize pirate sovereignty over Spanish territorial waters. Then the governor cannot possibly expect us to cease our attacks on Spanish shipping, Isabella replied smoothly. The choice is his. As Valdez sailed away with her counteroffer, Isabella realized that she had just demanded formal recognition of what amounted to a pirate nation. The exile who had once begged for mercy from a colonial tribunal was now dictating terms to colonial governors. You've come a long way from the frightened woman on Tortuga's docks, Captain Reyes observed. I've learned that fear is just another word for powerlessness, Isabella replied, and I will never be powerless again. That night, as she stood alone on deck watching stars reflect on calm Caribbean waters, Isabella reflected on her journey from exile to power. She had gained everything she thought she wanted: respect, influence, the ability to shape events rather than merely endure them. But she had also lost something in the process, something she was only beginning to understand. The woman who had written desperate letters trying to protect her village would not recognize the woman who now negotiated with colonial governors as an equal. The idealistic girl who had believed in justice and mercy had been replaced by a pragmatic political operative who understood that power was the only currency that mattered. The transformation was complete. Isabella Morales, the exiled traitor, was dead. In her place stood La Consejera, advisor to pirates and negotiator with governors, a woman who had learned that in the Caribbean, survival meant embracing the very ruthlessness that the civilized world condemned. And as she watched the lights of distant islands twinkle in the darkness, Isabella discovered that she was not sorry for what she had become. The colonial world had cast her out, branded her a traitor, and left her to die. Now that same world was forced to treat with her as an equal, to recognize her power and accommodate her demands. It was, she realized, the sweetest revenge of all. No regrets? Captain Reyes asked, joining her at the rail. Isabella smiled, and in that smile was all the cold calculation she had learned in her months as a pirate. None whatsoever, she replied. The girl who believed in colonial justice died in Port Royal. The woman who replaced her has learned to make her own justice. And what justice will you make? Isabella looked out at the vast Caribbean stretching endlessly before them, full of possibilities and opportunities for those bold enough to seize them. The kind that ensures I am never powerless again, she said. The kind that makes the world accommodate me rather than the other way around. Captain Reyes nodded slowly. Then you have truly become one of us. No, Isabella corrected, her voice carrying new authority. I have become something more. I have become exactly what the colonial world created when it cast me out. They're equal in power, if not in law. As La Venganza sailed on through the Caribbean night, Isabella Morales stood at her bow like the figurehead of destiny itself, transformed from victim to victor, from exile to empress of her own fate. The ruthless pirate captain had indeed made her his, but in doing so, he had also made her into something the Caribbean had never seen before. A woman with the power to reshape the very waters that had once threatened to drown her. And in those dark waters, under the endless canopy of stars, Isabella smiled with the cold satisfaction of absolute power, finally achieved.